Long before the Roman legions ever set foot upon the shores of Britannia, a people of enigmatic origin, whom we now call the Picts, were already weaving their intricate tapestry of life in the northern reaches of the island. Imagine a land, cloaked in ancient forests, where mist clung to craggy mountains, and the rhythm of the waves against the shore was the oldest song known. This was Caledonia, a wild and untamed expanse, a place of stark beauty and profound mystery, where the very air seemed to hum with forgotten tales. It was here, in the vast wilderness north of the Fourth Clyde Line, that the ancestors of the Picts carved out their existence, their presence stretching back into the deep currents of prehistory, long before written records would even begin to whisper their name. The story of the Picts truly begins in the mists of time, with communities whose roots were deeply embedded in the Iron Age. Archaeological evidence, though scattered and often elusive, paints a picture of sophisticated tribal societies that flourished in what is now Scotland, perhaps as early as 800 BCE. These were not primitive peoples, but skilled artisans and resourceful farmers, living in settlements that ranged from isolated farmsteads to more substantial hill forts, strategically placed atop commanding elevations. Imagine the scene. Circular timber homes, their roofs thatched with reeds, nestled within earthen ramparts, smoke curling lazily into the crisp northern air. Life was intimately connected to the land and the changing seasons, a cycle of planting and harvesting, hunting and gathering, all under the vast, ever-shifting canvas of the Caledonian sky. One of the earliest glimpses into the distinct cultural practices of these northern inhabitants comes from their burial customs, long before the Romans arrived. These people were interring their dead in elaborate cairns and cist burials, sometimes accompanied by finely crafted pottery or bronze ornaments. These grave goods suggest a belief in an afterlife and a reverence for their ancestors, a spiritual landscape as rich and complex as the physical one they inhabited. The sheer effort involved in constructing these monumental tombs speaks volumes about their communal organization and shared spiritual beliefs. Perhaps these walls whispered stories to the stars, silent witnesses to generations of lives lived and mourned. When the Romans finally pushed their empire's boundaries northward in the 1st century CE, they encountered these formidable tribes, whom they collectively termed Caledonians. The Roman historian Tacitus, writing around 98 CE, offers one of the earliest, albeit biased, literary descriptions of these northern peoples. He portrays them as fierce warriors, united by a shared determination to resist Roman conquest. Tacitus, in his work Agricola, recounts the famous Battle of Mons Graupius in 83 CE, where the Roman general Agricola supposedly defeated a large Caledonian army led by a chieftain named Calgacus. While the precise location of this battle remains a subject of scholarly debate, its significance lies in the Roman perception of a powerful, organized resistance. Calgacus's speech, as recorded by Tacitus, is a stirring call to arms, portraying the Romans as plunderers and enslavers, and the Caledonians as the last bastion of freedom. "They make a desert and call it peace," he is famously quoted as saying, a powerful indictment that resonates even today. However, the term Picts itself does not appear in Roman records until much later, around the late 3rd or early 4th century CE. The name Picti is generally believed to derive from the Latin word pingere, meaning to paint or to tattoo. This suggests that a striking characteristic of these people, from the Roman perspective, was their practice of body adornment, likely through intricate tattoos or body paint. Imagine a warrior, his skin adorned with swirling patterns of blue woad or other pigments, a fearsome sight on the battlefield. This practice was not unique to the Picts. Other Celtic tribes also used body paint. But for the Romans, it became a defining feature of these northern adversaries. Historians still debate whether the Caledonians of Tacitus's era were direct ancestors of the later Picts, or if the term Picts encompassed a broader confederation of tribes that coalesced over time. It's a fascinating puzzle, trying to trace the threads of identity through the shifting sands of ancient history. Was there a distinct ethnic or linguistic shift, or was it simply a new Roman label for the same resilient people? The prevailing view suggests a continuity, with the various Iron Age tribes gradually consolidating and evolving into the cultural entity we recognize as the Picts. Their language, known as Pictish, is another layer of this mystery. While it is now extinct, evidence from place names and a few inscriptions suggests it was a P-Celtic language, related to Welsh and Cornish, rather than the Q-Celtic branch that led to Scottish Gaelic. This linguistic link hints at deep, shared roots with other Celtic peoples across Britannia. The Roman presence in Britannia, though never fully extending into Pictish territory, profoundly shaped the development of these northern societies. The construction of Hadrian's Wall, begun in 122 CE, and later the Antonine Wall, around 142 CE, served as formidable barriers, defining a frontier between the Romanized south and the independent north. These walls were not just defensive structures, they were cultural divides, shaping trade routes, political alliances, and the very identity of the peoples on either side. For the Picts, the walls represented a constant challenge, a symbol of foreign encroachment that spurred both conflict and, perhaps, a greater sense of unity among the northern tribes. Raids across the frontier became a common feature of life, with Pictish warriors striking south, seeking plunder, and demonstrating their defiance against the mighty Roman Empire. One lesser-known detail about these early interactions is the Roman use of auxiliary troops from various parts of the empire to man their northern garrisons. Imagine a Syrian archer or a Batavian cavalryman, accustomed to warmer climes, standing guard on a wind-swept Scottish hillside, gazing out at the wild, untamed lands of the Picts. These encounters, though often hostile, were also moments of cultural exchange, however fleeting. Roman coins and pottery have been found in Pictish settlements, suggesting trade or perhaps the spoils of successful raids. The Picts were not isolated. They were keenly aware of the Roman world, and their own culture developed partly in response to this powerful neighbour. The pre-Roman and early Roman periods set the stage for the emergence of the Pictish kingdom. The foundations were laid in these Misty origins, a resilient people, deeply connected to their land, skilled in warfare and craftsmanship, and possessing a rich spiritual life. Their distinct identity, hinted at by their unique burial practices and later by their famed body art, was already beginning to coalesce. The challenges posed by the Roman Empire, far from crushing them, may have inadvertently forged a stronger, more unified identity among the northern tribes, laying the groundwork for the powerful Pictish kingdoms that would later dominate much of Scotland. the whispers of their distinct culture, barely audible in the Roman accounts, would soon grow into a roar that echoed across the ancient landscape. If you're enjoying this, make sure to subscribe and leave in the comments the time and place you're listening from. The mist-shrouded hills of Caledonia, a land of ancient forests and windswept moors, had long been home to a people whose spirit was as unyielding as the granite beneath their feet. These were the ancestors of the Picts, a mosaic of tribes who, even before the Roman legions set foot on British soil, had cultivated a profound connection to their rugged landscape. Their lives were interwoven with the rhythm of the seasons, their stories etched into standing stones, and their defiance a whisper carried on the northern winds. Then, a new sound began to rumble from the south, the disciplined march of Roman legions, a sound alien to these wild lands. The year was 43 CE, when Emperor Claudius launched his ambitious invasion of Britain, forever altering the island's destiny. What began as a campaign to secure a new province and bolster imperial prestige soon became a relentless, generations-long struggle against the island's northern inhabitants. For the tribes of Caledonia, the arrival of Rome was not merely a territorial dispute. It was an existential threat to their way of life, their autonomy, and their very identity. The Roman advance was methodical, a slow, inexorable tide pushing northward. Forts sprang up like mushrooms after a rain, their timber and stone a stark contrast to the circular earthworks of native settlements. Roads, straight and purposeful, began to dissect the landscape, conduits for legions and supplies, but also symbols of an imposed order. The tribes of what would become Pictland watched, wary and resolute. They were not a unified empire with a single leader, but a collection of distinct groups, the Caledoni, the Maetai, the Apidii, and others, who in the face of a common enemy often found common cause. One of the earliest and most formidable challenges to Roman expansion came from a confederation of northern tribes, most notably the Caledoni. Their resistance was not always a direct pitched battle. It was often a war of attrition, a series of ambushes, raids, and strategic withdrawals that bled Roman resources and morale. The dense forests and treacherous bogs of Caledonia were their allies, offering cover and confounding Roman tactics designed for open-field warfare. The Roman historian Tacitus, whose father-in-law, Gnaeus Julius Agricola, served as governor of Britannia from 77 to 84 CE, provides us with some of the most vivid, albeit Roman-centric, accounts of these early encounters. Agricola, a skilled general, pushed deep into Caledonia, aiming to subdue the northern tribes once and for all. His campaign culminated in the famous Battle of Mons Graupius, likely fought around 83 CE. The exact location of this battle remains one of history's enduring mysteries, debated by scholars for centuries. Was it in the Grampian Mountains, as the name suggests, or perhaps further north near the Moray Firth? We may never know for certain. What we do know from Tacitus's account in his work Agricola is that a vast native army, estimated by Tacitus at 30,000 men, led by a chieftain named Calgacus, confronted the Roman legions. Tacitus portrays Calgacus as a fiery orator, delivering a stirring speech before the battle, famously declaring, "They make a desert and call it peace." While this speech is undoubtedly a Roman literary construct, it captures the essence of native resistance and the deep resentment towards Roman imperialism. The battle itself was a brutal affair. The Roman legions, with their superior training, discipline, and weaponry, ultimately prevailed. Tacitus describes the slaughter. The plain was strewn with dead bodies, and the Roman cavalry, pursuing the fugitives, added to the carnage. Yet despite the Roman victory, the spirit of the Caledoni was not broken. Calgacus and many of his warriors melted back into the forests and mountains, their defiance unquenched. The victory, though decisive on the battlefield, did not lead to the complete subjugation of Caledonia. It was a pattern that will repeat itself for generations. The Romans, ever pragmatic, soon realized that outright conquest of the entire island was a costly and perhaps impossible endeavor. The sheer logistical challenge of maintaining legions so far north, coupled with the relentless guerrilla tactics of the native tribes, began to wear down their resolve. The dream of a Roman Britannia, stretching to the northernmost tip of the island, slowly faded. Instead, a new strategy emerged: containment. Around 122 CE, under the reign of Emperor Hadrian, a monumental undertaking began that would forever symbolize the boundary between Roman order and Caledonian wildness: Hadrian's Wall. This colossal barrier, stretching 73 Roman miles, approximately 80 modern miles, from coast to coast across northern England, was not just a defensive fortification. It was a statement. It was a declaration that Rome had drawn a line in the sand, or rather, in the stone. The construction of Hadrian's Wall was an engineering marvel, a testament to Roman organizational prowess. Thousands of legionaries and auxiliaries toiled for years, quarrying stone, digging ditches, and erecting mile castles, turrets, and forts. Imagine the sheer scale of the project: a continuous stone wall up to 15 feet high and 10 feet thick in places, punctuated by regular garrisons. It was a physical manifestation of Rome's power, designed to control movement, deter raids, and project an image of impregnable strength. But the wall was more than just a military barrier. It was also a customs post, regulating trade and collecting tolls, and a psychological weapon, an imposing presence that must have loomed large in the minds of the tribes to the north. For the people who would become the Picts, the wall was a constant reminder of the Roman presence, a tangible border that separated their ancestral lands from the Roman province. It was a line they would constantly test, probe, and occasionally breach. The wall was not always the northernmost frontier. In the 140 CE, under Emperor Antoninus Pius, the Romans briefly pushed further north, constructing a new, shorter barrier known as the Antonine Wall. This turf and timber rampart, spanning about 37 miles across the narrowest neck of Scotland, represented a renewed, albeit short-lived, attempt to expand Roman control. For about 2 decades, the Antonine Wall served as the frontier, but the logistical difficulties and the fierce resistance of the native tribes proved too great. By the 160 CE, the Romans had retreated back to the more robust defences of Hadrian's Wall, a tacit admission of the limits of their power in Caledonia. The period following the consolidation of Hadrian's Wall saw a shift in the nature of conflict. Large-scale battles became less frequent, replaced by a constant low-intensity struggle. The tribes beyond the wall, increasingly referred to by Roman writers as the Caledonii and later the Maetai, launched raids across the frontier, seeking plunder, captives, and perhaps simply to assert their independence. These raids were met with Roman punitive expeditions, swift and brutal incursions designed to inflict damage and discourage further attacks. One of the lesser-known but fascinating aspects of this period is the Roman use of intelligence and diplomacy. While the legions were a blunt instrument, The Romans also employed spies and agents to gather information about the northern tribes. They also engaged in a complex web of alliances and rivalries, sometimes playing one tribe against another to maintain a fragile balance of power. Gifts, subsidies, and even Roman goods were sometimes used to foster friendly relations, or at least to buy temporary peace. This nuanced approach suggests that the Romans understood the limitations of military might alone in dealing with such a resilient and fragmented foe. The late 2nd and early 3rd centuries CE saw renewed and intense Roman campaigns into Caledonia. Emperor Septimius Severus, a formidable man, Elytra leader, arrived in Britain in 208 CE. Determined to finally crush the northern tribes, he launched a massive invasion, leading his legions deep into Pictish territory. Cassius Dio, another Roman historian, described Severus's campaign as incredibly arduous, with the Romans suffering heavy losses not only from enemy attacks, but also from the harsh terrain and climate. Severus reportedly lost 50,000 men to disease and skirmishes, a staggering number. Despite these losses, Severus's campaign was militarily successful in that it forced the northern tribes to sue for peace. However, his death in York in 211 CE, before he could fully consolidate his gains, meant that the Roman presence in Caledonia once again receded. His sons, Caracalla and Geta, quickly abandoned their father's ambitious plans and withdrew Roman forces back to Hadrian's Wall, which would remain the northern frontier of Roman Britannia for the next 2 centuries. The retreat from Caledonia and the subsequent focus on maintaining Hadrian's Wall marked a crucial turning point. It solidified the existence of a distinct northern zone, largely outside direct Roman control, where the native cultures continued to evolve. This was the crucible in which the Pictish identity truly began to forge itself. While the Romans continued to refer to them by older tribal names, the collective identity of the Picts, a name derived from the Latin Picti, meaning painted ones, was gradually taking shape, perhaps in response to the very presence of Rome. The term Picti itself is a subject of scholarly debate. Did it refer to their practice of tattooing or body painting, as implied by Roman writers? Or was it a more general term for outsiders or enemies? The archaeological evidence, particularly from later Pictish stones, certainly suggests a rich tradition of intricate artistic expression, which could have included body art. Regardless of its precise origin, the name became synonymous with the unconquered, fierce people beyond the wall. Life for the tribes north of Hadrian's Wall was undoubtedly shaped by their proximity to the Roman Empire. They were not entirely isolated. Trade, both legitimate and illicit, flowed across the frontier. Roman goods, from pottery and coins to luxury items, have been found in Pictish settlements, indicating a degree of interaction. Some Picts may have even served as mercenaries in Roman armies or worked as labourers in Roman Britain, bringing back new ideas and technologies. However, the primary relationship remained one of tension and conflict. The Picts developed sophisticated military tactics to counter Roman might. They were masters of ambush, using their knowledge of the terrain to their advantage. Their weaponry, while perhaps less standardized than Roman equipment, was effective in close-quarters combat. They were also skilled raiders, striking swiftly and disappearing back into the wilds before Roman legions could mount a full response. The Roman forts along Hadrian's Wall were not just defensive positions, they were constant garrisons, ever vigilant against Pictish incursions. The daily life of a Roman soldier on the wall was one of perpetual watchfulness. The distant sound of pipes or the rustle in the trees potentially signaling an approaching raid. The legacy of this clash with Rome is profound. It solidified the distinct cultural and political identity of the Picts. Unlike the tribes in southern Britain, who were largely Romanized, the Picts maintained their unique customs, language, and social structures. The Roman presence, far from crushing their spirit, seems to have galvanized it, fostering a sense of shared identity and resistance against an external power. Historians still debate the extent to which Roman contact influenced Pictish society. Did the constant pressure from Rome lead to greater political cohesion among the disparate Pictish tribes, forcing them to unite against a common enemy? Or did it merely intensify existing rivalries, with some tribes perhaps even allying with Rome at different times? The evidence is fragmented, but it seems likely that both scenarios played out at various times, reflecting the complex and fluid political landscape of early medieval Scotland. The Roman departure from Britain in the early 5th century CE, as the empire faced existential threats closer to home, left a power vacuum. The legions withdrew, leaving behind a province that had grown dependent on Roman military protection. For the Picts, this moment was not one of relief, but of opportunity. The Painted Ones, who had so fiercely resisted the might of Rome for centuries, were now poised to step onto the stage of history, no longer defined solely by their opposition to an empire, but by their own burgeoning power and distinct cultural identity. The stage was set for the rise of the Pictish kingdoms, a period when their unique artistry, language, and political structures would truly flourish, free from the direct shadow of the eagle standards. The walls that Rome had built, both physical and metaphorical, had failed to contain the spirit of Caledonia, and a new era was about to dawn in the north. As the Roman legions finally withdrew, leaving Britannia to chart its own course, a new dawn, or perhaps a twilight, settled over the northern lands. The Picts, no longer bound by the distant shadow of imperial power, found themselves at a crossroads. Their painted bodies and fierce independence had kept the Romans at bay, but now a different kind of influence began to seep into their territories, carried not by swords and shields, but by words and faith. This was the age of saints and scholars, a time when the ancient stones of Pictland began to whisper not just of ancestral spirits, but of a new, singular God. The seeds of Christianity had been sown in Britain long before the Roman departure, perhaps by merchants or soldiers. But it was in the 5th and 6th centuries that it truly began to take root in the northern reaches, often carried by figures whose names would echo through history. One such figure, though his direct impact on the Picts is debated, was Saint Ninian. Tradition holds that Ninian, a Briton educated in Rome, established a church at Whithorn in what is now Galloway, around the year 400 CE. This Candida Casa, or White House, was said to be a beacon of Christian learning. While Ninian's direct missionary work among the Picts is largely legendary and difficult to verify, his presence in the broader region undoubtedly contributed to the gradual spread of Christian ideas. It's plausible that his disciples, or those inspired by his mission, eventually ventured northward, carrying the gospel into Pictish lands. The real turning point, however, is often attributed to Saint Columba, an Irish monk whose story is intertwined with the very fabric of early Scottish Christianity. Around 563 CE, Columba, a prince of the O'Neill clan, arrived on the shores of Iona, a small, windswept island off the coast of Mull. Exiled from Ireland, he established a monastery there, that would become one of the most important centers of Christian learning and missionary activity in Europe. From Iona, Columba and his monks embarked on journeys into the heart of Pictland, seeking to convert the powerful Pictish kings and their people. The conversion of King Brud I, also spelled Bride, is a pivotal moment. Recorded vividly in Adomnan's Life of Saint Columba, written about a century after Columba's death. Adomnan recounts how Columba, accompanied by a few companions, journeyed to Brud's stronghold near Inverness, likely around 565 CE. The king, initially hostile and unwilling to grant them entry, was said to have been swayed by Columba's miraculous powers. Adomnan describes how the monastery gates, locked by Brud's command, miraculously flew open at Columba's blessing, and how the saint silenced a Pictish druid who was challenging his authority. Whether these events unfolded exactly as described, the account underscores the profound cultural and spiritual clash that was occurring. The Picts had their own deeply rooted spiritual beliefs, their druids, and their reverence for natural forces and ancestral spirits. Christianity offered a different cosmology, a different path to salvation. Brud's conversion, whether a genuine spiritual awakening or a shrewd political move to forge alliances with the growing Christian kingdoms, opened the door for widespread missionary activity. Monasteries, often built on ancient, sacred sites, began to spring up across Pictland. These were not just places of worship, they were centers of learning, art, and craft. Monks meticulously copied manuscripts, preserving not only Christian texts, but also fragments of classical knowledge. They taught Latin, the language of the church and scholarship, and introduced new artistic styles and technologies. The fusion of these new Christian ideas with existing Pictish traditions gave birth to a uniquely vibrant culture. Nowhere is this more evident than in the art and monumental sculpture that emerged during this period. The Picts, who had long carved intricate symbols onto their standing stones, now began to incorporate Christian iconography. The earliest Pictish stones, known as Class I stones, feature enigmatic symbols: the crescent and V-rod, the double disc and Z-rod, the serpent, the swimming elephant-like beast, whose meanings are still debated by scholars. Were they clan symbols, astronomical markers, or a form of early writing? Historians still disagree on the precise function and meaning of these symbols, with some suggesting they were a form of heraldry, others a complex spiritual language. With the arrival of Christianity, these symbols began to appear alongside crosses, angels, and biblical scenes on what are known as Class II stones. These stones are often more elaborately carved, sometimes shaped like crosses themselves, and feature a mix of Pictish symbols and Christian imagery. Imagine a towering stone cross, its surface alive with intricate knotwork, swirling beasts, and human figures. On one side, the crucifixion of Christ might be depicted, while on the reverse, a familiar Pictish beast might coil, or a double disc and Z-rod might sit proudly above a hunting scene. These stones, such as the magnificent examples found at Aberlemno and St. Vigen's, are not just religious artifacts, they are historical documents, recording a society in transition, a visual dialogue between old and new. The carving techniques were remarkable. Using only iron tools, Pictish sculptors transformed raw stone into breathtaking works of art. The precision of the interlace patterns, the expressive faces of the figures, and the dynamic energy of the animals all speak to a highly skilled and sophisticated artistic tradition. The stones served multiple purposes. They marked graves, commemorated important individuals, celebrated victories, and acted as focal points for worship and community gathering. They were essentially outdoor cathedrals, their silent sermons etched in stone for all to see. Beyond the monumental stones, the monasteries themselves fostered a flourishing of craftsmanship. Illuminated manuscripts, though fewer Pictish examples survive compared to Irish or Anglo-Saxon ones, would have been created, their pages adorned with vibrant colours and intricate designs. Metalwork, too, reached new heights. Exquisite brooches, chalices, and reliquaries were fashioned, often incorporating the same swirling patterns and zoomorphic motifs seen on the stones. The Hunterston brooch, a magnificent silver gilt piece from the 7th century, is a testament to the unparalleled skill of these early medieval artisans, its intricate filigree and amber settings a dazzling display of wealth and artistry. The monastic life itself was rigorous. Monks dedicated themselves to prayer, study, and manual labour. They cultivated land, brewed ale, and provided hospitality to travellers. They were the scribes, the scholars, the artists, and often the healers of their communities. The spread of Christianity also brought with it literacy, particularly Latin literacy, which opened up new avenues for communication and record-keeping. While much of Pictish history remains shrouded in mystery due to the scarcity of written records, the monastic chroniclers, inspired by the Irish tradition, began to record events, even if from a particular ecclesiastical perspective. However, the adoption of Christianity was not always a smooth process. The Picts, like many other pagan peoples, held on to their ancestral beliefs with tenacity. The conversion was likely a gradual process, often starting with the ruling elite and slowly filtering down through society. There would have been resistance, syncretism, and a blending of old and new practices. The continued presence of Pictish symbols on Christian monuments is a powerful indicator of this cultural synthesis. It wasn't a wholesale abandonment of the old, but rather an integration, a reinterpretation of ancient meanings within a new spiritual framework. Perhaps these stones, with their dual imagery, whispered stories to the stars, bridging the gap between a forgotten past and a hopeful future. One lesser-known detail about this period is the role of female saints and monastic foundations. While male saints, like Columba, dominate the historical narratives, women also played a significant part in the spread of Christianity and the establishment of religious communities. Saint Brigid of Kildare, an Irish abbess, had a profound influence, and it is likely that female monastic communities existed in Pictland, though their stories are less well documented. These women would have been spiritual leaders, educators, and patrons of the arts, contributing to the rich tapestry of early medieval Pictish society. The monastic centres also served as crucial links to the wider Christian world. Through them, Pictland was connected to Ireland, Anglo-Saxon England, and even continental Europe. Ideas, artistic styles, and scholarly texts flowed back and forth, enriching the intellectual and cultural landscape of the North. This was a period of intense cultural exchange, where the distinctiveness of Pictish identity was not erased, but rather transformed and expressed through new mediums. The political landscape also continued to evolve. The Pictish kingdoms, though increasingly influenced by Christian ideas, remained powerful. The period saw the rise and fall of various kings, alliances forged and broken, and ongoing conflicts with their neighbours, particularly the Scots of Dalriata and the Anglo-Saxons to the south. The conversion to Christianity did not magically end warfare, but it did introduce a new moral framework and, at times, a common ground for diplomacy. The legacy of this age of saints and scholars is profound. It laid the foundations for a distinctively Scottish Christian tradition, one that blended indigenous spiritual practices with the universal tenets of the new faith. The monumental stones, standing sentinel across the Pictish heartlands, are a permanent testament to this transformation. They are not just relics of a bygone era. They are narratives carved in stone, telling tales of kings and saints, of ancient beliefs and new revelations, of a people who, despite the passage of centuries, continue to captivate our imaginations. These silent sentinels, weathered by wind and rain, continue to guard the secrets of a vibrant and complex civilization, inviting us to ponder the mysteries of their symbols and the enduring power of their faith. As the mists of time swirled, obscuring the precise boundaries of their earliest settlements, the Picts began to coalesce into more defined political entities. It was not a single, monolithic Pictland that emerged from the Iron Age, but rather a patchwork of smaller kingdoms, each with its own chieftains, its own territories, and its own ambitions. Imagine a landscape dotted with hill forts, each perched atop a strategic rise, its timber and stone walls enclosing a community. A small court and the seat of a local ruler. These were the early power centers, the nuclei around which larger political structures would gradually form. The Roman presence to the south, though never truly conquering Pictish lands, exerted an undeniable influence. The very act of resistance, of maintaining their independence against such a formidable empire, likely fostered a sense of shared identity among disparate Pictish groups. Yet, even as they faced an external threat, internal dynamics were constantly shifting. Alliances were forged and broken, territories expanded and contracted, often through a complex interplay of warfare, diplomacy, and intermarriage. One of the most enduring mysteries surrounding Pictish succession lies in their unique system of inheritance. Early medieval sources, particularly the Venerable Bede writing in the 8th century, suggest that the Picts followed a matrilineal system, where kingship passed through the female line. Bede, in his Ecclesiastical History of the English People, notes that when any doubt arises, they choose a king from the female royal stock rather than the male. This assertion has sparked centuries of debate among historians. Did it mean that a king's successor was his sister's son, or that the right to rule was derived from a royal mother? Even if the king himself was male, or was it a more nuanced system, perhaps a pragmatic response to maintaining peace between rival clans, where a king might marry a princess from a neighbouring kingdom to solidify his claim, and their children would then have a strong claim to both territories? The archaeological record, unfortunately, offers little direct evidence to clarify this intriguing social structure, leaving us to ponder the true nature of Pictish royal lineage. As the Roman legions withdrew from Britain in the early 5th century, a power vacuum emerged, and the Pictish kingdoms, along with their Brittonic and Gaelic neighbours, began to assert themselves more forcefully. The period from the 5th to the 9th centuries is often referred to as the Age of Kingdoms in Pictland, a time when powerful rulers began to consolidate their control, leading to the formation of larger and more influential polities. One of the earliest and most significant of these emerging kingdoms was Fortriu, generally believed to be located in the central Pictish heartland, encompassing areas around modern-day Perthshire and Angus. The kings of Fortriu appear to have held a preeminent position among the Picts, often acting as overlords to other, smaller Pictish realms. Their strategic location, controlling fertile lands and key trade routes, undoubtedly contributed to their ascendancy. The names of some of these early kings echo faintly through the historical record, often preserved in king lists compiled much later, sometimes centuries after their reigns. These lists, like the Pictish Chronicle, are invaluable, but also fraught with challenges, as they can be incomplete, contradictory, or even legendary in their early entries. Yet, they offer glimpses of individuals who shaped the destiny of their people. Consider Brude, son of Maelcon, who reigned in the latter half of the 6th century. His name, often Latinized as Bride, is one of the first Pictish kings to be mentioned in contemporary historical accounts, most notably by Adamnan, the biographer of Saint Columba. Adamnan's Life of Saint Columba provides a rare, detailed glimpse into the court of a Pictish king. Columba, the Ish missionary, said to have visited Brude at his royal residence, likely near Inverness, around 565 AD. This encounter is significant not only for its religious implications, Columba's mission to convert the Picts to Christianity, but also for what it reveals about Brude's power and prestige. Adamnan describes Brude as a powerful ruler, capable of commanding respect from his own people and even from the fierce Magi or Druids who initially opposed Columba. The account paints a picture of a king holding court, surrounded by his retinue, making decisions that affected the spiritual and political landscape of his kingdom. Columba's successful mission, whether through divine intervention or clever diplomacy, marked a turning point in the Christianization of the Picts, a process that would unfold over centuries, gradually replacing older pagan beliefs with the new faith. The 7th century witnessed increasing pressure from the burgeoning Anglo-Saxon kingdoms to the south, particularly Northumbria. The Northumbrians, having embraced Christianity and expanded their territories, frequently clashed with their Pictish neighbours. These conflicts were not merely territorial disputes, they were also cultural and religious struggles, as the Anglo-Saxons sought to extend their influence. One of the most pivotal moments in Pictish history occurred in 685 AD at the Battle of Dun Nectaine, also known as Nectansmere. This was a decisive clash between the Picts, led by King Bride III, another King Brude, illustrating the recurrence of names within royal lines, and the Northumbrians under their ambitious king, Egfrith. Egfrith, having already subjugated much of northern Britain, marched his army into Pictish territory, confident of victory. However, the Picts, under Bride's leadership, employed superior tactics, possibly luring the Northumbrian forces into an ambush in a marshy, difficult terrain. The result was a catastrophic defeat for Northumbria. King Egfrith was killed, and his army was annihilated. The Battle of Dun Nectaine was a watershed moment. It not only halted Northumbrian expansion into Pictland, but also effectively broke their dominance over the region. The Picts, under Bride III, reasserted their independence and secured their borders for generations. This victory is a testament to Pictish military prowess and the strategic acumen of their kings. It allowed Pictish culture and political structures to flourish without immediate external threat, fostering a period of relative stability and growth. Imagine the relief and pride that must have swept through Pictish communities as news of the victory spread, the sense of having repelled a powerful invader and secured their future. Following this triumph, the Pictish kingdoms continued to evolve, and the process of consolidation continued. By the 8th century, the kingdom of Fortriu appears to have grown even stronger, perhaps absorbing or dominating other smaller Pictish realms. This period also saw an increasing engagement with the wider Christian world, with Pictish kings sponsoring the construction of monasteries and churches, and Pictish art, particularly their distinctive carved stones, reaching new heights of sophistication. One king who stands out in this era is Oengus I, son of Fergus, who reigned from around 729 to 761 AD. Oengus was a formidable and ambitious ruler, often considered one of the most powerful Pictish kings. His reign was marked by extensive military campaigns, not only against his Pictish rivals, but also against the neighbouring Dalriata Scots and the Britons of Strathclyde. He is credited with significantly expanding Pictish influence and territory. The Annals of Ulster, an Irish chronicle, records several of Oengus's campaigns, including his subjugation of Dalriata in the 730s. This victory was particularly significant, as it brought the Gaelic kingdom under Pictish control for a time, a remarkable reversal of fortunes, given the later domina. Many people's absolute flourishing of Pictish art and culture. Many of the most elaborate Pictish stones, with their intricate carvings of animals, symbols, and Christian iconography, date from this period. These stones served multiple purposes, as memorial markers, territorial claims, and expressions of royal and religious power. They are a visual testament to the wealth and artistic skill of Oengus's kingdom. It's tempting to imagine these stones, freshly carved and brightly painted, standing as proud declarations of a powerful king's reign, reflecting his piety and his might. However, even a king as powerful as Oengus faced challenges. The succession within Pictland remained a complex affair, often leading to internal strife. While Oengus consolidated power, his reign was not without its rivals and rebellions, suggesting that the concept of a single, undisputed Pictish king was still an evolving one. The nature of these internal power struggles is often shrouded in the brevity of annalistic entries, leaving much to our imagination. Were these conflicts between different branches of the royal family, or between powerful regional lords asserting their independence? The historical record often provides only the bare bones of events, leaving the motivations and machinations of these ancient power struggles to the realm of scholarly interpretation. The 9th century brought new and devastating challenges to the Pictish kingdoms. The arrival of the Vikings. These Norse raiders, arriving first as plunderers and later as settlers, disrupted the political landscape of northern Britain profoundly. Their longships, capable of navigating both open seas and shallow rivers, allowed them to strike deep into Pictish territory, targeting coastal settlements, monasteries, and royal strongholds. The rich monasteries, repositories of wealth and learning, were particularly attractive targets. The Viking raids undoubtedly weakened the Pictish kingdoms, forcing them to divert resources to defence and disrupting established trade routes and political alliances. The Annals record numerous attacks and devastations. The Pictish kings, once focused on internal consolidation and expansion against their immediate neighbours, now faced a relentless and unpredictable external threat. This period saw a decline in the production of monumental Pictish art, perhaps reflecting the instability and the shifting priorities of a people under siege. It is against this backdrop of Viking incursions that the story of the Picts begins to intertwine irrevocably with that of the Scots of Dalriata. The Dalriata kingdom, located in what is now Argyll, had its own long history of interaction with the Picts, sometimes as allies, often as rivals. However, the Viking threat seems to have fostered a greater sense of shared destiny, or at least a pragmatic alliance between these two distinct peoples. The traditional narrative, largely stemming from later medieval sources, points to Kenneth MacAlpin as the figure who united the Picts and Scots, founding the Kingdom of Alba, the precursor to modern Scotland. Kenneth, a king of the Scots, is said to have inherited the Pictish throne through a combination of dynastic claim and military conquest, sometime around 843 AD. The Pictish Chronicle lists him as the first king of the unified realm. However, the precise nature of this union remains a subject of considerable historical debate. Was it a sudden, decisive conquest, as some accounts suggest, or a more gradual process of political assimilation and dynastic intermarriage that had been underway for generations? Some scholars argue that the Pictish identity didn't simply vanish overnight, but rather merged with that of the Scots, with the Pictish language and customs gradually fading as Gaelic culture and language became dominant. The idea of a single conquest might be an oversimplification, a narrative crafted later to legitimize the new Scottish monarchy. Archae. It's more likely that the Viking threat accelerated a process of cultural and political convergence that was already in motion. The kings of Fortry, for example, had already exerted significant influence over Dal Riata in earlier centuries, and intermarriage between Pictish and Scottish royal families was not uncommon. The last kings explicitly identified as kings of the Picts disappear from the historical record in the mid-9th century, replaced by kings who are increasingly referred to as kings of Alba or kings of the Scots. The language itself reflects this profound transformation. The Pictish language, which we know so little about beyond its existence, gradually gave way to Gaelic, the language of the Scots. By the 10th century, the distinct Pictish identity as a separate political and cultural entity had largely been subsumed into the emerging Scottish kingdom. Yet, their legacy endured. The magnificent Pictish carved stones, scattered across the Scottish landscape, continued to stand as silent witnesses to a vibrant culture. The place names, the archaeological remains, and the echoes in later folklore all speak of a people who shaped the very foundations of Scotland. The Pictish kingdoms, with their powerful kings like Brud and Oengus, their unique matrilineal traditions, their fierce independence, and their artistic brilliance, laid crucial groundwork for the nation that would eventually emerge. Their story is one of resilience, adaptation, and ultimately emerging into a new, larger identity, a testament to the ever-shifting tapestry of history. The whispers of their past continue to resonate, inviting us to delve deeper into the mysteries of their kings and the kingdoms they ruled, knowing that beneath the green hills and ancient stones, a rich and complex history awaits discovery. The mists that often clung to the ancient lands of Alba, as Scotland was then known, seemed to hold not only the secrets of the Pictish people, but also the very essence of their artistic expression. For it is through their art, more than any other surviving remnant, that we can begin to glimpse the inner world of these enigmatic folk. Imagine, if you will, the early morning light catching the dew on a standing stone, revealing carvings that have endured for well over 1,000 years. These are not mere decorations. They are the Picts' enduring language, etched into the very fabric of their landscape and their lives. The most striking and certainly the most numerous examples of Pictish art are their symbol stones. These remarkable monuments, found predominantly in eastern Scotland, are a testament to a highly skilled and distinctive artistic tradition. There are hundreds of these stones, ranging from rough boulders with a few simple incisions to elaborately carved cross slabs that stand as masterpieces of early medieval art. The earliest examples, often called Class 1 stones, are typically undressed stones, natural in their form, upon which symbols are incised. These symbols are the heart of the Pictish mystery. They appear in pairs, sometimes with an additional Z-rod or V-rod accompanying them. And they depict a fascinating array of animals, abstract shapes, and everyday objects. Consider the animals. The salmon leaping with an almost palpable energy, the deer poised and graceful, the serpent coiled and powerful, the eagle majestic in its flight. These are not simply naturalistic representations. There is a stylized elegance to them, a sense that they carry deeper meaning. Then there are the abstract symbols, perhaps even more intriguing, the crescent and V-rod, the double disc and Z-rod, the tuning fork symbol, the mirror and comb symbol. What did they mean? Were they clan badges, personal identifiers, religious totems, or perhaps a form of early writing? This is one of the great scholarly disputes surrounding Pictish art. Historians and archaeologists have debated for centuries whether these symbols represent a form of proto-writing, a system of heraldry, or something else entirely. Some scholars, like Professor Catherine Forsyth, have argued for a linguistic interpretation, suggesting they might represent personal names or even a form of early Pictish script, though this remains a hotly contested theory. The sheer repetition and standardized forms of the symbols certainly suggest a system of communication, but its exact nature continues to elude us. The symbols themselves are often paired, and the combination seems to be significant. A double disc paired with a Z-rod might appear alongside a crescent and V-rod, for instance. The Z-rod and V-rod elements, which often bisect or accompany the primary symbols, are particularly curious. They might represent broken spears or arrows, or perhaps even abstract representations of power or lineage. The mirror and comb symbol, almost always found together, suggests a connection to women of high status. As these were valuable personal items in the early medieval period, perhaps these stones marked the graves of important individuals, or commemorated significant events, or even delineated tribal territories. The very act of carving them, often with considerable effort, speaks to their profound importance to the Pictish people. As the centuries progressed, particularly from the 8th and 9th centuries, Pictish art evolved. The Class 2 stones emerged, characterized by their rectangular, dressed forms and the incorporation of the Christian cross. These cross slabs are often incredibly ornate, featuring the earlier Pictish symbols alongside intricate interlace patterns, depictions of biblical scenes, and human figures. The transition from Class 1 to Class 2 stones illustrates a fascinating period of cultural synthesis, where the indigenous Pictish traditions met and mingled. Led with the burgeoning influence of Christianity, the cross, a powerful symbol of the new faith, often dominates one side of the slab, while the reverse might still feature the familiar Pictish symbols, sometimes subtly integrated into the Christian iconography. Take, for example, the magnificent Aberlemno sculptured stones in Angus. Here, you can witness this cultural fusion firsthand. One of the stones, a Class 2 cross slab, features a large, beautifully carved cross on one face, adorned with elaborate knotwork and spirals. On the reverse, however, are classic Pictish symbols, a crescent and V-rod, a double disc and Z-rod, and a vibrant hunting scene, complete with mounted warriors and fantastical beasts. This juxtaposition is not one of conflict, but rather of coexistence and adaptation. It suggests that the Picts did not simply abandon their old beliefs when embracing Christianity, but rather found ways to integrate them, to see their ancient symbols through a new lens, or perhaps to simply retain their ancestral identity alongside their new faith. The hunting scene itself is a rich tapestry of detail, showing warriors on horseback, their spears raised, pursuing animals. These scenes are not just decorative. They likely reflect the importance of hunting and warfare in Pictish society, and perhaps even depict specific historical events or legendary tales. Beyond the stones, Pictish artistry extended to metalwork, particularly silver. Hordes of intricately crafted silver objects have been unearthed, offering another glimpse into their aesthetic sensibilities and technological prowess. The Norreys Law hoard, discovered in Fife in 1819, is a prime example. Though much of it was unfortunately melted down, surviving pieces include a magnificent silver chain, pins and plates adorned with Pictish symbols. The craftsmanship is exquisite, demonstrating a mastery of metallurgy and a keen eye for detail. These objects were not merely utilitarian. They were prestige items, likely belonging to the elite, signaling wealth, status, and perhaps even spiritual authority. The presence of Pictish symbols on these items further reinforces their significance as markers of identity and belief. The artistry wasn't confined to grand monuments or precious metals. Fragments of carved bone, antler, and even wood have been found, suggesting that Pictish artistic expression permeated many aspects of their daily lives, from personal adornments to household items. Imagine a Pictish artisan, perhaps by the flickering light of a peat fire, meticulously carving a comb with a stylized animal motif, or incising a small stone with a personal symbol. These smaller accents suggest a national pride. More intimate objects speak to a widespread artistic tradition, not just one reserved for monumental works. The precise tools used for these carvings are also a subject of fascination. For the stone carving, iron chisels and hammers would have been essential, requiring considerable skill and strength. The intricate knotwork and fine details suggest a high degree of precision, perhaps achieved with smaller, specialized tools. For the metalwork, techniques such as repoussé, hammering from the reverse side to create a raised design, and engraving would have been employed. The Picts were not isolated in their artistic development. They were part of a wider network of early medieval cultures, and their art shows influences from both insular art, the art of early medieval Ireland and Britain, and continental European styles, particularly in the interlace patterns and zoomorphic designs that became increasingly prevalent. One of the enduring mysteries surrounding Pictish art is the question of its creators. Were they specialized artisans, a distinct class within Pictish society? Or was artistic skill more widespread? While the monumental scale and intricate detail of some works suggest professional sculptors, it's also possible that many individuals possessed artistic talent and contributed to the art. A niche tapestry of Pictish visual culture. The sheer volume of carved stones across Pictland points to a vibrant and active artistic community, deeply embedded in the cultural and spiritual life of the people. The symbolism itself is a deep well of speculation. The beast symbol, often depicted with a long snout, pointed ears, and sometimes a fin, is particularly enigmatic. Is it a real animal, perhaps a stylized otter or a dolphin, or a mythical creature? Its frequent appearance suggests a significant role, perhaps as a guardian spirit or a symbol of power. The salmon, a creature of both land and sea, known for its arduous upstream journey, might have symbolized perseverance, transformation, or abundance. The serpent, a universal symbol across many cultures, could represent healing, rebirth, or protection. The eagle, a bird of prey, might have embodied strength, vision, or divine connection. The human figures depicted on the later cross slabs are also rich in detail. They often show warriors, priests, or noblemen, sometimes engaged in battle, sometimes in procession, or in scenes from biblical narratives. These figures offer valuable insights into Pictish dress, weaponry, and social hierarchy. The warriors are often shown with distinctive hairstyles, tunics, and shields, providing a rare glimpse into their appearance. These carvings are not just artistic expressions, they are historical documents, offering visual evidence where written records are scarce. The sheer scale of the artistic output is remarkable for a people who left so few written records of their own. It's as if they poured their entire narrative, their beliefs, their history, and their identity into stone and silver, hoping these durable materials would carry their story through time. And indeed, they have. These symbols, weathered by centuries of wind and rain, continue to speak to us, inviting us to decipher their ancient language, to understand the minds and hearts of the people who created them. The transition to Christian iconography on the later stones is particularly telling. It shows not a sudden eradication of the old ways, but a gradual assimilation. The Pictish symbols did not disappear overnight. They often persisted, sometimes in more subtle forms, sometimes alongside the new Christian imagery. This suggests a resilience of indigenous culture, a willingness to adapt and integrate rather than simply replace. The cross slabs, with their fusion of styles, stand as powerful testaments to this cultural dialogue, a meeting of spiritual worlds expressed through the chisel and hammer. Imagine the communal effort involved in creating these monuments. The quarrying of the stone, its transportation, the meticulous carving that would have taken weeks, if not months, to complete. These were not solitary acts, but community endeavors, imbued with collective meaning and purpose. The placement of the stones, often in prominent locations, along ancient routes or near significant settlements, suggests they served as important focal points for the Pictish communities. They were landmarks, gathering places, and perhaps even sacred sites. The mystery of the symbols, however, remains. No Rosetta Stone has yet been discovered to unlock their precise meaning. Perhaps their meaning was fluid, changing over time or depending on context. Perhaps they held multiple layers of meaning, understood differently by different members of society. This ambiguity is part of their enduring allure. It allows us to wonder, to speculate, to project our own interpretations onto these ancient forms, connecting us across the millennia to the minds of the Picts. The legacy of Pictish art is not just one of historical curiosity. It is one of profound beauty and enduring power. These stones, these fragments of metalwork, these humble carvings are windows into a world that is otherwise largely silent. They allow us to imagine the vibrant colours that might have adorned them, the stories herod in their shadows, the beliefs they embodied. They are a testament to the human need to create, to communicate, and to leave a lasting mark upon the world. And as the sun sets over a Pictish symbol stone, casting long shadows across its ancient carvings, one can almost hear the echoes of a distant past, a story told in stone, waiting patiently for us to listen. The gentle hum of Pictish life, a rhythm established over centuries, was about to be shattered by the fierce roar of the North Sea and the longships that cut through its waves. For generations, the Picts had honed their art, built their brocks, and carved their symbols into the very stones of their land, largely undisturbed by external threats of such magnitude. Their interactions with the Romans had been fleeting, their skirmishes with the Scots of Dalriata localized. But the late 8th century brought a new, terrifying force to their shores: the Vikings. The first recorded Viking raid in Britain struck the monastery of Lindisfarne in 793 AD, a chilling harbinger of what was to come for the Picts. Though Lindisfarne lay south of Pictland, the news, carried by frightened monks and fleeing merchants, must have rippled northwards, a whisper of terror on the wind. It was not long before these Norsemen, driven by a thirst for plunder, new lands, and perhaps a spirit of adventure that knew no bounds, turned their longships towards the fertile coastlines and isolated islands of Pictland. The Picts, for all their martial prowess and their formidable hill forts, were not prepared for the speed and ferocity of these attacks. The Vikings, often arriving without warning, struck at monasteries, rich in silver and gold and poorly defended, and at coastal settlements, carrying off goods, livestock, and people into slavery. The very nature of Pictish society, with its scattered settlements and powerful local lords, made a unified defense difficult in the face of such swift, decentralized assaults. The monasteries, once beacons of learning and spiritual solace, became targets, their sacred treasures ripe for the taking. The monastic community on Iona, a jewel of Columban Christianity and a place deeply revered by the Picts, suffered multiple devastating raids, beginning in 795 AD and continuing for decades. These attacks forced the monks to eventually abandon the island, relocating to Kells in Ireland and to Dunkeld in Pictland, taking with them precious relics like the Book of Kells, a testament to both their faith and the terror of the times. The impact was immediate and profound. The economic life of the Picts, once robust, was severely disrupted. Trade routes became perilous, and the accumulation of wealth, whether in precious metals or livestock, became a dangerous proposition. The very fabric of society began to fray under the constant threat. Coastal communities, once thriving, either fortified themselves or were abandoned, their inhabitants seeking refuge further inland. The rich archaeological record of Pictland, which before the Viking Age shows a vibrant artistic tradition and burgeoning settlements, begins to tell a story of destruction and upheaval. Evidence of burnt settlements and hoards of silver buried in haste speak volumes of the fear that gripped the land. Yet, the Picts were not merely passive victims. They adapted, as all resilient peoples do. Fortifications were strengthened, and watchtowers likely became more prevalent along the coast. The Pictish warriors, renowned for their ferocity in battle, undoubtedly met the Vikings in skirmishes, though detailed accounts are scarce. However, the sheer scale and persistence of the Norse incursions meant that direct military confrontation was often a losing battle for the Picts, who lacked the naval power to counter the Viking longships at sea, or the centralized command structure to quickly muster large armies to repel raids across a vast and fragmented territory. Historians still debate the exact nature and extent of Pictish resistance during these early decades of the Viking Age. While some scholars emphasize the devastating impact, leading to a rapid decline of Pictish culture, others point to evidence of continued Pictish artistic and political activity well into the 9th century, suggesting a more nuanced picture of adaptation and survival. The truth likely lies somewhere in between. Pockets of intense destruction, alongside areas where Pictish life, though altered, continued to flourish, albeit under immense pressure. One of the lesser-known but significant consequences of the Viking raids was the disruption of the Pictish succession system. The Picts, as we've discussed, appear to have had a unique system, perhaps matrilineal or at least not strictly patrilineal, where kingship did not necessarily pass from father to son. The chaos and instability introduced by the Vikings may have weakened this traditional system, making it more vulnerable to external pressures and internal power struggles. The Norsemen themselves, in their relentless pursuit of new territories, began to establish settlements, particularly in the northern islands of Orkney and Shetland, and along the northern and western coasts of mainland Pictland. These areas, once firmly Pictish, gradually became Norse strongholds, their languages and customs taking root. The arrival of the Vikings wasn't just about raids and destruction. It was also about settlement and cultural exchange, albeit often forced. As the Norsemen began to settle, they brought their own agricultural practices, their own legal systems, and their own gods. Over time, intermarriage between Picts and Norsemen would have become common, blurring the lines of ethnic identity. Place names across northern Scotland today bear witness to this Norse legacy, with many towns and geographical features having Old Norse roots. The 9th century became a crucible for the Picts, a period of immense transformation. The constant pressure from the Vikings, coupled with ongoing rivalries with the Scots of Dal Riata, pushed Pictish society to its breaking point. It is in this tumultuous century that we see the gradual yet ultimately complete disappearance of the Pictish identity as a distinct political and cultural entity. The last known Pictish king, Bredi, son of Focal, is recorded in the early 9th century. After him, the historical record becomes increasingly intertwined with the rise of the Scottish kingdom. The traditional narrative, long held, posits that Kenneth MacAlpin, a king of Dal Riata with Pictish connections, his mother was said to be Pictish, seized power in Pictland around 843 AD, uniting the Scots and Picts under a single crown to form the Kingdom of Alba. This event, often romanticised as the birth of Scotland, is shrouded in mystery and debate. The famous MacAlpin's treachery legend, though likely apocryphal, speaks of Kenneth inviting Pictish nobles to a feast and then slaughtering them, thereby clearing his path to power. While this tale is almost certainly a later invention, it reflects the dramatic nature of the transition. The reality was probably far more complex and gradual. The Viking onslaught had weakened both the Picts and the Scots, making a unified front a strategic necessity for survival. Kenneth MacAlpin, or his immediate predecessors, likely capitalized on the disarray within Pictish leadership, perhaps through a combination of military prowess, strategic alliances, and dynastic claims. The Pictish royal line, already under strain from Viking attacks and internal strife, may have simply faded or been absorbed. The crucial question that historians continue to grapple with is, did the Picts disappear, or were they simply absorbed into a new, larger identity? Did their culture vanish, or did it merely transform, contributing its unique threads to the tapestry of early Scottish identity? The archaeological evidence suggests that many aspects of Pictish material culture, such as their distinctive art styles, continued for a time after the supposed unification, evolving and blending with Scottish and Norse influences. The Pictish language, a Celtic tongue, likely died out gradually, replaced by Gaelic, the language of the Scots, which was itself undergoing change and influence from Norse. The transition was not a sudden conquest, but a slow, organic process of cultural amalgamation under the immense pressure of Viking incursions. The new kingdom of Alba, though ruled by a Gaelic-speaking elite, would have contained a substantial Pictish population, whose customs, traditions, and even legal practices would have continued to shape the emerging Scottish identity. The Pictish stones, those silent sentinels of their past, did not suddenly cease to be revered. Instead, they stood as enduring monuments, their symbols perhaps reinterpreted, their stories slowly fading from collective memory, but their physical presence remaining. The Viking Age, therefore, was not just an era of destruction for the Picts, it was a catalyst for fundamental change. It forced a re-evaluation of political structures, spurred migration, and ultimately led to the merging of distinct peoples into a new entity. The Picts, who had carved their identity into the very landscape for over a millennium, found their distinct voice slowly fading into the broader chorus of a nascent Scotland. Their disappearance as a separate people is one of history's great enigmas, a testament to the transformative power of external forces and the complex dynamics of cultural evolution. Perhaps these changes were inevitable, but the relentless pressure of the longships undoubtedly accelerated the process, pushing the Picts from the stage of history as a distinct nation, yet leaving an indelible mark on the land and the people who would come to call themselves Scots. The chill winds that swept across the northern reaches of Britain, carrying the scent of salt and heather, witnessed a slow, almost imperceptible transformation. The vibrant, enigmatic Picts, who had for centuries carved their stories into stone and defied the might of empires, found their world shifting. It was not a sudden cataclysm, no thunderous invasion that erased their identity overnight, but a gradual, intricate weaving of fates with another people, the Gaels, who had sailed from Ireland to establish their kingdom of Dal Riata on the western shores. For generations, these two peoples, Picts and Gaels, had coexisted, sometimes in conflict, often in trade, and increasingly through intermarriage. The Dal Riatan Gaels, themselves a warrior people, beat with them not only their language, Gaelic, but also a burgeoning Christian faith, distinct in some ways from the Pictish Christianity, yet sharing common roots. As early as the 7th century, the influence of Dal Riata began to spread eastward, not through conquest alone, but through cultural exchange and political alliances. Royal families intermarried, creating a complex web of kinship that blurred the lines between the two peoples. A Pictish king might have a Gaelic mother, or a Gaelic queen might rule alongside a Pictish husband, their children inheriting a dual heritage. One of the pivotal figures in this unfolding drama was Oengus I, a powerful Pictish king who reigned from around 732 to 761 AD. His ambition knew few bounds, and his campaigns against Dal Riata were relentless. He brought much of the Gaelic kingdom under Pictish suzerainty, effectively uniting a significant portion of northern Britain under his rule. While his methods were often brutal, his reign marked a period of unprecedented Pictish dominance, a final flourish of independent Pictish power before the tides began to turn. Yet even in his victories, the seeds of integration were being sown. Gaelic nobles and warriors were incorporated into his court and army, their skills and loyalty becoming valuable assets. The 9th century brought new pressures and new opportunities. The Vikings, those fearsome raiders from the north, began to descend upon the coasts of Britain with increasing frequency and ferocity. Their longships, laden with warriors, brought devastation to both Pictish and Gaelic territories. Monasteries, rich in treasure and learning, were plundered. Settlements were burned. This shared threat, this common enemy, forced the Picts and Gaels into a closer, more desperate alliance. Survival often depended on cooperation, on pooling resources and fighting side by side against the Norsemen. It was against this backdrop of Viking raids and shifting power dynamics that the figure of Kenneth MacAlpin emerged, a man whose name would forever be associated with the birth of a new kingdom. The traditional narrative, often romanticized and perhaps overly simplified, tells of Kenneth, a Gaelic king of Dal Riata, inheriting the Pictish throne through a complex series of dynastic claims and a decisive victory over the Picts. The famous treachery of Scone, where Kenneth supposedly invited Pictish nobles to a feast and then massacred them, is almost certainly a later fabrication, a dramatic embellishment designed to legitimize Gaelic rule and demonize the Picts. Historians still debate the precise nature of Kenneth's ascent to power. Was it a peaceful dynastic succession, a clever political maneuver, or a more forceful takeover? The truth likely lies somewhere in between, a complex interplay of inheritance, alliance, and strategic military action. What is clear is that by the mid-9th century, around 843 AD, Kenneth MacAlpin, or Syniad Mac Ailpin in Gaelic, became the ruler of a unified kingdom that encompassed both Pictish and Gaelic lands. This new entity, initially known as the Kingdom of the Picts, or Fortriu, gradually evolved. Over time, the name began to shift, reflecting the growing dominance of Gaelic culture and language. By the 10th century, this kingdom was increasingly referred to as Alba, the Gaelic word for Scotland. The transition was not instantaneous, nor was it a simple renaming. It was a profound cultural and political transformation. The process of assimilation was multifaceted. The Gaelic language, already spoken in Dal Riata, began to spread eastward, slowly supplanting Pictish. While we know very little about the Pictish language itself, beyond a few place names and personal names, it seems to have been a Celtic language related to Welsh and Cornish. The gradual adoption of Gaelic was likely driven by several factors: the prestige of the new ruling elite, the practicalities of administration, and the influence of the church, which often used Gaelic. Over generations, as intermarriage continued and Gaelic became the language of power and commerce, Pictish faded from common use, becoming a language of memory, if it survived at all. The distinct Pictish identity, too, began to dissolve into the broader Scottish identity that was taking shape. The magnificent Pictish symbol stones, once vibrant expressions of their culture and beliefs, ceased to be carved. The intricate spiral patterns and stylized animals, the enigmatic symbols that spoke of a unique worldview, gave way to simpler Christian crosses and more conventional iconography. Perhaps the Picts themselves, or at least their descendants, continued to understand the meaning of these symbols for a time, but the impulse to create new ones waned. The last known Pictish symbol stone dates to the late 9th or early 10th century, a silent testament to a fading artistic tradition. The Pictish church, too, became fully integrated into the broader Scottish Christian church. While there had been differences in practice and organisation between the Columban Church of Dal Riata and the Pictish Church, these distinctions gradually blurred. The monasteries that had once been centres of Pictish learning and art, like Portmahomac, adapted to the new order, embracing Gaelic influence and aligning with the evolving ecclesiastical structures of Alba. Yet, the Picts did not simply vanish without a trace. Their legacy endured in the landscape itself, in the names of mountains and rivers, in the ancient forts and settlements that dotted the land. Their bloodlines continued through the veins of the people of Alba, their genes interwoven with those of the Gaels. The Pictish kings and queens were now ancestors of the Scottish monarchs, their stories part of the tapestry of Scottish history. The very idea of Scotland, this new kingdom of Alba, was built upon the foundations laid by the Picts, their agricultural practices, their social structures, and their deep connection to the land. The process of forming Alba was not a smooth, monolithic event, but a series of complex, localized changes. In some areas, Pictish identity may have persisted longer, a quiet undercurrent in the evolving culture. In others, the transition to a Gaelic-dominated society was swifter. The new kingdom was not a homogeneous entity, but a patchwork of diverse regions, each with its own history and traditions, gradually coalescing under a single crown. The kings of Alba, even as they promoted Gaelic culture, often found it politically expedient to acknowledge their Pictish heritage, to draw upon the legitimacy of both traditions. The shift from the kingdom of the Picts to Alba was more than a change of name. It represented a fundamental reorientation. It marked the point where the focus moved from a distinct ethnic identity to a broader territorial and political one. The people of Alba were no longer solely Picts or Gaels, but Scots, a new identity forged in the crucible of shared challenges and common aspirations. The memory of the Picts, once a living, breathing culture, began to recede into the mists of time, becoming the stuff of legend and scholarly inquiry. The gradual fading of Pictish identity is a poignant reminder of the fluid nature of culture and ethnicity. It highlights how identities are not static, but are constantly being shaped and reshaped by political forces, cultural exchange, and the pressures of survival. The Picts, who had so defiantly maintained their distinctiveness for centuries, ultimately became absorbed into a larger, more enduring entity. Their fierce independence, their artistic brilliance, their enigmatic symbols, all contributed to the rich tapestry of early Scotland, even as their name faded from the everyday tongue. As the 10th and 11th centuries unfolded, the kingdom of Alba solidified its position. Its kings, descendants of Kenneth MacAlpin, continued to expand their influence, pushing southwards, eventually incorporating much of what we now know as Scotland. The language of the court, the church, and increasingly the common people was Gaelic. The Pictish language, if it had not already vanished, became a ghost, whispered perhaps in remote glens or preserved in forgotten lore. The last vestiges of a separate Pictish political identity disappeared entirely. The old Pictish provinces, once powerful entities, were gradually replaced by new administrative divisions. The symbol stones, standing silent sentinels across the landscape, became monuments of a bygone era, their meanings increasingly obscure to those who passed them by. They stood as beautiful, haunting reminders of a people who had once dominated the northern lands, a people whose spirit, though no longer named, flowed in the rivers and echoed in the winds of Alba. The story of the Picts, therefore, ends not in a dramatic defeat, but in a slow, graceful absorption. They did not disappear, but rather transformed, their unique essence becoming an integral part of something new and enduring, the Kingdom of Scotland. The vibrant colours of their art, the strength of their warriors, the wisdom of their kings, all contributed to the foundation of a nation that would in time become a formidable force on the European stage. And so the land that was once Pictland became Alba, a testament to the powerful, often subtle, forces of historical change. The whispers of the past, however, still carry echoes of those painted people, their stories etched into the very stones of the Scottish earth, waiting to be rediscovered by those who listen closely enough. As the 9th century waned and the 10th dawned, a profound transformation was underway in the northern lands of Britain. The Picts, once a formidable and distinct people, found their destiny increasingly intertwined with that of their Gaelic-speaking neighbours from Dalriata. This was not a sudden conquest, but a gradual, complex process of assimilation and political integration, a weaving together of cultures that would ultimately give birth to the Kingdom of Alba, the precursor to modern Scotland. The Pictish legacy, though its language and distinct name began to fade, was not extinguished. Rather, it became an indelible thread in the tapestry of this new nation. The pivotal figure in this story, often credited with uniting the Picts and Gaels, was Kenneth MacAlpin, or Chinead mac Ailpin. While traditional narratives often portray him as a conqueror, sweeping away the Picts, historical understanding has grown more nuanced. It's more likely that Kenneth, himself of mixed Pictish and Gaelic descent, his mother was almost certainly a Pictish princess, inherited or claimed the kingship of both peoples through a combination of dynastic marriage, strategic alliances, and perhaps even a period of shared rule. The precise circumstances of this union remain one of the enduring mysteries of early Scottish history. Some accounts, particularly later Gaelic ones, speak of a decisive victory or even a treacherous banquet where Pictish nobles were slain, but these are likely later embellishments designed to glorify the Gaelic lineage. It's more probable that Kenneth, a skilled politician and warrior, capitalized on the weakening of Pictish power, perhaps due to Viking incursions and the inherent instability of their succession system, which may have allowed for female line inheritance, making his claim through his mother particularly strong. What is certain is that by the mid-9th century, around 843 AD, Kenneth MacAlpin was recognised as king of both the Picts and the Scots of Dalriata. His reign marked the official beginning of the Kingdom of Alba. This new entity, while often presented as a Gaelic triumph, was in reality a hybrid. The Pictish element was not simply absorbed, it contributed significantly to the nascent kingdom's structure, culture, and even its identity. The very name Alba, which originally referred to Britain as a whole, came to specifically denote this new kingdom, and it was a name known to both Picts and Gaels. One of the most enduring Pictish contributions was undoubtedly their sophisticated artistic tradition. While the Pictish language, likely a P-Celtic tongue related to Welsh, slowly gave way to Gaelic, the visual language of their stones continued to speak. The intricate knotwork, the stylized animals, and the unique Pictish symbols, the crescent and V-rod, the double disc and Z-rod, the Pictish beast, did not vanish with their political distinctiveness. Instead, these motifs were incorporated into the emerging insular art style, influencing the illuminated manuscripts and high crosses produced in Alba. The Book of Kells, for instance, though often associated with Irish monasticism, shows clear stylistic influences that resonate with Pictish art, suggesting a shared artistic milieu across the Irish Sea and northern Britain. The Pictish cross slabs, with their fusion of Christian iconography and native symbolism, served as a powerful visual bridge, demonstrating how the new Christian faith was integrated into existing cultural frameworks. The administrative structures of the new kingdom also bore the imprint of Pictish practices. The concept of the mormar, a high steward or great earl, which became a significant office in medieval Scotland, may have roots in Pictish provincial administration. The division of the land into shires and thanages, though fully developed later, likely built upon earlier Pictish territorial divisions. Even the royal centres of Alba, such as Scone, which became the traditional coronation site for Scottish kings, had Pictish precedents. Scone itself was an ancient Pictish royal and religious centre, suggesting a deliberate continuity rather than a complete break with the past. The famous Stone of Scone, or the Stone of Destiny, a symbol of Scottish monarchy, is steeped in legend, but its significance as a coronation stone may well have originated in Pictish traditions of royal inauguration. The process of linguistic shift from Pictish to Gaelic was a gradual one, likely taking several centuries. It was probably driven by a combination of factors: the prestige of the Gaelic court, the influence of the church, which increasingly used Latin and Gaelic, and the intermarriage between Picts and Gaels. As the Pictish language slowly receded from daily use, it left behind a fascinating linguistic ghost: place names. Many Scottish place names, particularly in the north and east, retain echoes of the Pictish tongue. Names like Abernethy, referring to the mouth of the River Nethy, or Pitlochry, meaning place of stones, are thought to derive from Pictish elements, offering tantalizing clues to the lost language. These linguistic remnants are like fossilized whispers, telling us that beneath the surface of Gaelic Scotland, a deeper, older language once thrived. Despite the political integration, a sense of distinct Pictish identity persisted for a time. Even after Kenneth MacAlpin, some rulers were still referred to as King of the Picts in certain annals, indicating that the title and the people it represented were not immediately erased. It was only later, perhaps by the end of the 10th or early 11th century, that the term Pict largely disappeared from historical records, replaced by Albanach, people of Alba, or Scotus, Scots. This disappearance, however, was not an extinction, but a transformation. The Picts did not vanish. They became the Scots. Their descendants continued to live in the lands they had always inhabited, their bloodlines merging with those of the Gaels, their traditions subtly shaping the emerging Scottish identity. The enduring mystery surrounding the Picts, particularly their language and the meaning of their symbols, has led to a rich academic debate. Historians and archaeologists continue to grapple with the question of how quickly and completely the Pictish identity was subsumed. Was it a peaceful amalgamation, a pragmatic political union, or a more forceful imposition of Gaelic culture? The truth likely lies somewhere in between, a complex interplay of power, culture, and demography. The lack of extensive written records from the Pictish perspective means we largely view this period through the lens of their neighbours, particularly the Irish and later the Anglo-Saxons, whose accounts are often coloured by their own biases. This scholarly dispute highlights the challenges of reconstructing the history of a people whose own voices are largely silent in the surviving records. The legacy of the Picts can be seen in the very landscape of Scotland. Their monumental stones, standing sentinel in fields and churchyards, are not just relics of a lost past, but active participants in the present, connecting modern Scotland to its deep roots. They are reminders that the history of Scotland is not a singular, monolithic narrative, but a rich tapestry woven from many threads. Pictish among the most vibrant and mysterious. The Picts, though their name faded, gifted the nascent Scottish kingdom with a powerful artistic heritage, a complex administrative foundation, and a deep sense of place, all of which contributed to the unique character of the nation that would emerge. Their story is a testament to the enduring power of culture, even when faced with political and linguistic shifts, and a poignant reminder that the past is never truly gone, but merely transformed, its echoes resonating through the ages. As the sun set over the ancient Pictish heartlands, now part of the Kingdom of Alba, one might imagine the new kings, perhaps Kenneth's successors, looking out over the same hills and valleys their Pictish predecessors had ruled. Perhaps they saw not just a conquered territory, but a land rich with history, a people whose skills and traditions could be harnessed for the future. The Pictish legacy was not just in their symbols or their place names, but in the very spirit of the land, in the resilience and adaptability of its people. The Picts, in their disappearance, left behind a profound presence, a silent yet powerful influence on the emerging Scottish identity. The intricate patterns on their stones, once symbols of a distinct people, became part of a larger, shared artistic heritage, speaking to a continuity that transcended political boundaries. The memory of the Picts, though often shrouded in mystery, continues to inspire wonder and curiosity, a testament to a civilization that, despite its eventual assimilation, left an indelible mark on the history of Britain. Their story is a gentle reminder that even in the face of profound change, the essence of a people can endure, subtly shaping the future in ways that are both seen and unseen. The earth still holds its secrets close, but with every careful brushstroke of an archaeologist's hand, with every laser scan of a weathered stone, a little more of the Pictish world emerges from the shadows of time. The quest to understand these enigmatic people is far from over. It is a vibrant, ongoing dialogue between the present and a past that continuously reshapes itself with each new discovery. Modern archaeology, far from being a static discipline, embraces technology and interdisciplinary approaches that would have seemed like magic to earlier generations of scholars. Consider the sheer scale of the challenge. For centuries, the Picts were largely defined by the Roman accounts, often biased, always external, and later by the records of their conquerors or Christian chroniclers. Their own voices, etched into stone and metal, remained largely unintelligible, their settlements often overlooked, their story fragmented. But the last few decades have witnessed a revolution in Pictish studies, fueled by innovative techniques and a renewed dedication to seeing the Picts not just as a footnote in Roman history, but as a sophisticated, independent culture. One of the most profound shifts has come from the application of non-invasive archaeological methods. Instead of the traditional, often destructive dig, techniques like LiDAR, light detection and ranging are now employed. Imagine an aircraft flying over a seemingly unremarkable patch of Scottish countryside, its lasers piercing through dense foliage, mapping the ground beneath with astonishing precision. What might appear as a natural undulation to the naked eye can, through LiDAR, reveal the subtle contours of ancient fortifications, long-forgotten field systems, or the ghostly outlines of timber halls. This technology has literally unearthed hundreds of previously unknown sites, expanding our understanding of Pictish settlement patterns, agricultural practices, and the sheer density of their population in certain regions. For example, The landscape around Rhynie in Aberdeenshire, already famous for its Pictish symbol stones, has yielded a wealth of new information thanks to such surveys. What was once thought to be a small, isolated settlement is now understood to have been a significant early Pictish power centre, with evidence of extensive earthworks and multiple phases of occupation. This kind of discovery doesn't just add another dot to the map, it forces a re-evaluation of the political and social organisation of the Picts, suggesting a more complex, hierarchical society than previously imagined, especially in the earlier periods. Another area of intense focus is the reinterpretation of the symbol stones themselves. For generations, scholars grappled with their meaning, proposing everything from territorial markers to astronomical charts, from genealogical records to a form of proto-writing. The sheer consistency of the symbols across hundreds of stones, spanning centuries, strongly suggests a structured system of communication. While a complete decipherment remains elusive, one of history's most tantalizing mysteries, new approaches are yielding fascinating insights. One theory, gaining increasing traction, suggests that the symbols might represent a system of heraldry or a form of visual language conveying information about lineage, status, and alliances. The pairing of certain symbols, such as the crescent and V-rod with the double disc and Z-rod, could denote marriage alliances between powerful families or clans. The animals, the Pictish beast, the eagle, the salmon, might be totemic symbols representing specific groups or individuals. This interpretation moves away from the idea of a simple alphabet and towards a more nuanced understanding of a society that used visual cues to communicate complex social and political messages. Consider the Pictish beast, that enigmatic, dolphin-like creature that appears so frequently. Is it a mythical creature, a point, stylized representation of a real animal, or something else entirely? Some scholars have even proposed a connection to the mythological Kelpie or waterhorse, deeply rooted in Scottish folklore. The debate continues, but each new analysis, whether through digital imaging enhancing faint carvings or comparative studies with other early medieval art, adds another layer to the puzzle. Beyond the stones, the study of Pictish material culture has been significantly enhanced by advances in scientific analysis. Metal detector finds, once viewed with suspicion by some archaeologists due to the potential for disturbance, are now, when properly recorded and reported, providing invaluable insights. Hoards of silver, like the one found at Norreys Law in Fife in the 19th century, or more recent discoveries, offer glimpses into Pictish wealth, trade networks, and the artistry of their metalworkers. Analysis of the silver's composition can sometimes pinpoint its origin, revealing connections to Roman Britain or even further afield. The study of human remains, when available, also offers a window into Pictish life. Isotopic analysis of teeth and bones can reveal diet, geographic origin, and even migration patterns. Imagine discovering that an individual buried in a Pictish cemetery spent their childhood hundreds of miles away, perhaps in Ireland or even Scandinavia. Such findings challenge simplistic notions of isolated communities and highlight the mobility and interconnectedness of early medieval societies. While Pictish burial practices are still not fully understood, many sites seem to have been reused or disturbed. Each new excavation that yields undisturbed burials is a treasure trove of information. One of the most persistent scholarly disputes revolves around the timing and nature of the Picts' conversion to Christianity. While St. Columba's mission to the northern Picts in the late 6th century, as recounted by Adamnan, is a cornerstone of early Scottish history, The extent and speed of conversion remain debated. Were the southern Picts already largely Christianized by this point, perhaps through contact with Britons? How much did native Pictish beliefs and practices persist alongside the new faith? The symbol stones themselves offer compelling evidence of this transition. The earliest stones, Class 1, feature only abstract symbols and animals. Class 2 stones, however, dating from the 8th and 9th centuries, often combine these traditional Pictish symbols with Christian iconography, crosses, angels, biblical scenes. This artistic fusion suggests a period of syncretism where old and new belief systems coexisted and influenced each other. The masterful carving on stones, like the Abelemno sculptured stone, depicting both a battle scene, perhaps a historical event like the Battle of Dun-Nectane, and Christian symbols, speaks to a culture actively integrating new ideas while retaining its unique identity. Historians still disagree on the precise mechanisms of conversion. Was it a top-down process driven by powerful kings like Brede mac Maelcon or Nectan mac Der Ili, who saw political advantages in aligning with the Christian world? Or was it a more gradual, grassroots movement, spreading through monastic communities and individual missionaries? The archaeological record, with its evolving iconography and the increasing presence of monastic sites, suggests a complex interplay of both. The establishment of major monastic centres like Port Mahomac, now revealed through extensive archaeological excavation, demonstrates the growing institutionalization of Christianity within Pictland. The discovery of scriptoria and workshops at such sites also indicates a flourishing intellectual and artistic culture, not just a passive reception of foreign ideas. The very end of the Picts is another area of intense academic discussion. The traditional narrative speaks of the Gallicization of Pictland, culminating in the rise of the Kingd of Alba under Kenneth MacAlpin in the 9th century. This often implies a complete cultural absorption, where the Pictish language and identity simply vanished. However, recent scholarship suggests a more nuanced process. Linguistic studies, for instance, are attempting to reconstruct elements of the Pictish language from place names and a few tantalizing inscriptions. While it's clear the language was eventually superseded by Gaelic, it likely persisted in some areas for generations, perhaps even centuries, particularly in oral traditions. The idea of a sudden, complete disappearance of a language and culture is rarely accurate. Instead, it's often a process of gradual assimilation, cultural blending, and political redefinition. Perhaps the Picts didn't disappear so much as they evolved. The people who lived in what became Alba were a blend of Pictish and Gaelic ancestry, their cultures intertwined. The Pictish artistic traditions, particularly in stone carving, clearly influenced the art of the early Scottish kingdom. The very notion of Pictish identity itself might have been fluid, shifting over time in response to political alliances, religious changes, and external pressures. The ongoing work of archaeologists and historians is therefore about much more than just unearthing artifacts. It's about reconstructing a worldview, understanding a unique civilization on its own terms, and challenging long-held assumptions. It's about listening to the faint echoes of their lives, not just through what they left behind, but also through the careful analysis of the landscape they shaped, the symbols they carved, and the stories that still whisper in the winds of northeastern Scotland. Every new find, whether it's a piece of decorated pottery from a forgotten settlement, a newly deciphered inscription, or a reinterpretation of a familiar symbol stone, adds another thread to the rich tapestry of Pictish history. The picture that emerges is one of a resilient, innovative, and deeply artistic people who, despite facing powerful empires and profound cultural shifts, maintained a distinct identity for centuries. Their legacy is not just in their mysterious stones, but in the very fabric of Scotland itself, a testament to the enduring power of human creativity and the persistent allure of the past. And so, the quiet work continues, each generation of scholars and enthusiasts drawn by the enduring mystery of the painted people, forever seeking to understand the whispers of their ancient world. And so, as the mists of time continue to swirl around the ancient stones and forgotten battlefields, the story of the Picts, in its fragmented glory, draws to a close. Yet, to say it truly ends would be a disservice to the enduring mystery that they embody. Their world, once so vibrant and undeniably real, now exists largely in the whispers of the wind across the Grampian Mountains, in the silent testimony of carved symbols, and in the enduring fascination of those who seek to understand them. We have journeyed through their early emergence from the shadowy pre-Roman Iron Age, tracing their distinct cultural identity as it began to coalesce from the various tribes north of the Fourth Clyde Line. We have witnessed their fierce independence, their strategic prowess in resisting the might of Rome, and their eventual consolidation into a powerful kingdom that held sway over much of northern Britain. The Picts, as we have explored, were not merely a footnote in the grander narrative of Roman Britain or the Anglo-Saxon invasions. They were a dynamic, innovative people who forged a unique society, rich in artistry and resilience. Their mastery of stone carving, particularly the intricate symbolism of their monumental stones, remains a testament to their sophisticated belief systems and their profound connection to the land. These stones, scattered across the Scottish landscape, are more than just markers. They are silent storytellers, their surfaces etched with enigmatic beasts, human figures, and abstract patterns that continue to baffle and enchant. What secrets do these symbols truly hold? Are they a complex written language, a system of heraldry, a religious iconography, or perhaps a combination of all three? Historians and archaeologists continue to debate their precise meaning, a scholarly puzzle that adds another layer to the Pictish mystique. Some scholars, like Professor Catherine Forsyth, have argued for a linguistic interpretation, suggesting that the symbols represent a form of written communication, perhaps even a proto-alphabet, though consensus on this remains elusive. We have seen how their society, though often depicted as warlike, also fostered a remarkable artistic tradition, evident not only in their stone carvings, but also in their metalwork and other crafts, much of which has been lost to the ravages of time. Their fortified settlements, like Burghead and Dunnottar, speak of a people who understood defence and strategy, capable of constructing impressive strongholds to protect their communities and resources. The very names of their kings, like Brúd mac Maelcon and Nectan mac de Ely, emerge from the historical record, albeit often through the lens of their neighbours, offering glimpses into their political structures and dynastic struggles. These kings, far from being mere tribal chieftains, commanded significant power, capable of uniting disparate groups and leading armies against formidable foes. The Picts' interaction with their neighbours was a complex tapestry of conflict and cooperation. Their enduring resistance to Roman expansion, culminating in victories like that against the 9th Legion, cemented their reputation as formidable warriors. Their later struggles against the encroaching Angles of Northumbria, particularly the pivotal Battle of Dun Nectain in 685 AD, were crucial in shaping the political landscape of early medieval Britain, effectively halting Northumbrian expansion northwards and securing Pictish independence for several more centuries. This victory, under the leadership of King Bridie III, is a verifiable historical fact that underscores the Picts' capacity for strategic military success against a powerful and expanding kingdom. Their eventual assimilation into the larger kingdom of Alba, which would later become Scotland, is perhaps the most profound mystery of all. The conventional narrative often points to the gradual cultural and political absorption by the Gaels of Dalriata, culminating in the reign of Kenneth MacAlpin in the mid-9th century. Yet the precise mechanisms of this assimilation remain a subject of intense scholarly debate. Was it a peaceful merger, a gradual intermarriage and cultural exchange, or a more forceful conquest? The historical records from this period are frustratingly sparse, often biased, and leave much to interpretation. Did the Pictish language simply fade away as Gaelic became dominant? Or did it persist in certain regions for longer than we currently understand? The lack of surviving Pictish texts beyond the enigmatic symbols makes this question particularly challenging. Some historians suggest that the Pictish language, though distinct, may have been gradually supplanted by Gaelic through a process of elite emulation and intermarriage, rather than through outright conquest. The enduring allure of the Picts lies precisely in these gaps in our knowledge, in the tantalizing fragments that hint at a rich and complex civilization just beyond our full grasp. They were a people who, despite their profound impact on the history of Britain, left behind no written chronicles of their own, no epic poems to sing of their heroes, no detailed accounts of their daily lives. We are left to piece together their story from the archaeological record, from the often biased accounts of their enemies and neighbours, and from the careful analysis of their art and symbols. This absence of a direct voice makes them all the more compelling, inviting us to imagine, to speculate, and to continuously re-evaluate the evidence. Consider the lesser-known detail of their possible matriarchal or matrilineal succession. While the evidence is debated, some interpretations of early king lists and historical accounts suggest that royal succession among the Picts may have passed through the female line, a practice highly unusual for contemporary European societies. Bede, the venerable English monk, mentions that the Picts chose their kings from the female royal line when there was a dispute, a detail that has fueled much discussion among historians. If true, this would represent a significant departure from the patriarchal norms of their neighbours and offer a fascinating glimpse into their social structure and gender roles. This aspect, though not definitively proven, adds another layer of distinctiveness to their culture and challenges our assumptions about ancient European societies. The Picts, therefore, stand as a powerful reminder of the fluidity and complexity of history, of the many voices that have been silenced or lost to time. Their legacy is not just in the stones they carved or the battles they fought, but in the very questions they continue to pose. They force us to confront the limits of our understanding, to embrace the ambiguities of the past, and to appreciate the profound impact of cultures that, though seemingly vanished, have left an indelible mark on the world. Their story is a testament to human resilience, artistic expression, and the enduring power of a distinct cultural identity forged in the crucible of ancient Britain. As we reflect on their journey from the shadowy depths of prehistory to their eventual absorption into the nascent Scottish kingdom, we are left with a sense of wonder. What were their dreams, their fears, their daily joys and sorrows? What did the world look like through their eyes as they gazed upon the rugged Scottish landscape, the vast, unpredictable sea, and the endless expanse of the northern skies. Perhaps these questions are meant to remain unanswered, to fuel the imagination and to keep the spirit of inquiry alive. The Picts, in their enigmatic silence, continue to speak to us across the centuries, inviting us to delve deeper into the mysteries of the past, to appreciate the richness of human history, and to acknowledge the unique contribution of a people who, though their name may have faded from common parlance, left an enduring and unforgettable legacy on the ancient world. Their journey, though concluded in the historical record, continues in the minds of those who seek to understand the untold stories of our shared human past.